The Sega Game Gear was ahead of its time, featuring a full-color backlit screen in a portable handheld package. While it's enjoyable to play on the go, we now have the ability to play the console on the big screen. This is the GGHD, a Game Gear Consolizing kit from the folks over at GameBox Systems. This kit turns your Game Gear into a home console with the ability to output stunning HD video through its full-size HDMI port. So, let's take a closer look. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito, and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today, I am really excited to show you the newest Consolizing kit from GameBox Systems. Now, if you're a regular viewer of the channel, you'll know I've actually looked at all the Consolizing kits GameBox has released, ranging from the original Game Boy DMG, Game Boy Color, and of course, the Game Boy Advance. But now, it would appear it's Sega's turn to be in the spotlight with the release of the GGHD. This kit converts a standard Game Gear into a home console, and as with all GameBox kits, it features a full-size HDMI port as well as their own custom homegrown software that allows you to customize the video output. The GGHD utilizes a FPGA to process the Game Gear's video and audio signals so that it can be displayed on your television, and it works with first and third-party Sega Genesis controllers. Now, it should be noted that this kit is only compatible with VA0 and VA1 Game Gear revisions. It is not compatible with VA4, VA5, and Majesco variants. So if you are interested in picking one of these kits up, make sure you have a compatible system. The Game Gear holds a special place in my heart as it was the first handheld I ever owned that my parents got me for Christmas a long time ago. I'm just glad it's getting the attention it deserves with really cool mods like this. Alright, so in this video, I'm going to show you all the contents of the GGHD Consolizing kit. Then I'll demonstrate how to install it. I'll go over all of its features, review the pros and cons, and of course provide you with my overall thoughts. So the first thing we got is a really nicely designed 3-piece 3D printed case. This one here was made with a Macho Nacho theme and it looks amazing. The case was designed by Dennis, who can be found on Twitter at PointerFunction. And the shells are manufactured in-house by Noble of GameBox Systems. The print is really great quality with really nice details like these brass screw inserts that help make the case super easy to install. I really love these details. Noble will also be printing this more traditional black and gray shell, which looks great and gives more of that traditional Sega look. Now, this one here is an early print and has a few blemishes, but the actual ones they'll be shipping out, I'm told, will have a much better finish. Alright, the next items included in the kit are some machine screws for assembling the shell, some miscellaneous 3D printed bits, and capacitors to recap the console. It is strongly recommended that you replace all the caps in your Game Gear if they are original, even if the console is working. The Game Gear is notorious for having caps that leak and wreak havoc on the system. I recently released a video showcasing how I recap the Game Gear, so definitely check that out if you're interested in doing this mod. This kit also includes the controller interface board that features a 9-pin connector designed to work with Sega Genesis controllers. To connect the interface board to the GGHD mainboard, they've also included a ribbon cable. Speaking of which, the last and most important item in this kit is the GGHD PCB, which features a FPGA front and center, as well as a full-size HDMI port and USB-C to power the unit. Alright, so that's everything included in the GGHD kit. Now let me show you how to put it all together. Okay, first thing we need to do is open up the Game Gear. Once inside, you'll notice that all the capacitors have been replaced. Like I mentioned previously, recapping the Game Gear is a must before attempting this mod to ensure the Game Gear is fully functional and in working order. Once the console is open, let's go ahead and remove the motherboard by unfastening the 6 small screws around the perimeter of the console and the 2 larger screws on either side of the cartridge connector. Please note we will be reusing these 2 larger screws, so set them aside in a safe location. As you can see, this motherboard features a single ASIC, While this mod also works on dual ASIC VA1 Game Gears, the instructions are slightly different, so definitely refer to the installation instructions on the GameBox website linked in the video description. After taking the motherboard out of the front shell housing, we need to remove a few components. Let's start by removing these 6 capacitors. I know it's strange that we need to remove these capacitors right after installing them, but this mod bypasses a lot of the Game Gear circuitry. Now these caps are easily removed by simply snipping the legs with some flush cutters. And with the caps out of the console, remove the leftover legs on the pads by whisking them off with your soldering iron as shown. Great, now we need to remove these 3 components here. Using my desoldering gun, we'll make quick work of these. Give it a quick clean with some isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip to finish things off. Okay, now we need to remove this voltage inverter right here. To do this, use a knife edge tip and add some solder to the bottom 3 legs and then heat them all up at the same time. This should allow the component to slide right off. Just be aware of the surrounding components while doing this, as you don't want to accidentally remove any. Then we're going to want to do the same thing with this voltage inverter here using the same method. Then clean up any leftover solder with either a desoldering gun or solder wick. Fantastic. Now let's tackle the LCD. Go ahead and remove the 4 screws securing the reflective backplate. Then remove it by lifting it out. Next, desolder and remove the CFL tube. And then remove the 2 fuses on either side. Now carefully peel off the tape that helps secure the LCD ribbon cable. Next, we need to desolder the LCD ribbon. Add some flux, and then while applying heat with the iron, gently lift the LCD ribbon off. Be very careful not to yank it off, as you could risk lifting a pad. Once removed, carefully inspect the pads and make sure there is not any leftover solder or bridging. This can cause issues later on, so definitely inspect the pads to make sure they are nice and clean. Next, we need to remove these 4 resistors from this array near the CPU. Then bridge the pads with a solder blob as shown. And this is what it should look like when completed. Now drop the GGHD PCB onto the Game Gear like so, and make sure it is properly aligned with the cartridge pins below. Be sure that the castellated edges are aligned as well with the corresponding LCD pins. Then start by soldering the board to the cartridge pins, beginning with the 2nd pin from the left on the top row. I recommend just soldering the necessary pins, which I'm showing you here, but you can also solder all the pins if you desire. Alright, now we need to solder the LCD pads to the castellated edges. The easiest way to do this is to first add some solder to the tip of your iron, and then touch the castellated edge and the pin you wish to solder. The flux should help bridge the 2 together and result in a really nice weld. Then follow the same technique for the remaining pads. And this is what everything should look like. Next, solder in the 2 anchor points, which should help keep the GGHD secure to the Game Gear motherboard. Be sure to apply a downward force while soldering to ensure that the PCB is flush with the motherboard. Okay, next we need to wire a few connections. First, we need to tap the Game Gear clock signal. Solder a wire from the clock pad on the GGHD PCB to the pad labeled FB1. You want this wire to be as short as possible. Next, we need to solder a wire from the pad labeled T10 right below the CPU. This wire goes to the other side of the console to the T10 pad on the GGHD PCB. Alright, now the remaining wires that we need to solder are for tapping the button control and audio signals. There are quite a few connections to be made, so just pace yourself and don't rush. Fantastic, this is what a completed board should look like once everything is all soldered in place. One thing left to do on the motherboard is to bend the tabs on the link port connector flush so that it can easily fit into our new shell. You can just use some pliers to do this. And this is what it should look like. Now that the soldering is all done, let's move our attention to the controller interface board. All we need to do to prep it is to remove the retaining screws from either side. You may need to use some pliers to assist with this if the screws are on there pretty tight. Once they're out, we can easily remove the metal shielding. Moving our attention back to the GGHD board, lift the controller connector bail and then insert the included ribbon with the blue tab facing up. Then back to the interface board, open the bail on the connector labeled J2 and connect the other end of the ribbon cable to it, again with the blue tab facing up. Great, now grab the bottom shell. With a narrow file, smooth out the opening for the power button. I found that this helps the button actuation considerably. Next, drop in the controller interface board as shown, followed by the Game Gear motherboard. And then secure it with the 4 included short machine screws. Now install those 2 cartridge screws we previously set aside. Drop in the case midframe chassis by placing it over the controller port first as shown. Then follow that up with the top shell. Flip the entire unit over and secure everything with the 4 included long machine screws. And then stick on the 3D printed feet at each of the 4 corners. Flip the console back over and then finish things off with the really neat Game Gear logo details. I used some double-sided tape to keep them affixed to the shell. And that's it. We've completed the install of the GGHD. So overall, this was a pretty big undertaking. I won't say that the installation was difficult, rather it was just very lengthy and requires quite a bit of soldering. Including the recapping of the console, there's just a lot to do to get this mod up and running. But honestly, in the end, it was all worth it. To see the Game Gear on the big screen is quite a sight to behold. Those huge blocky pixels look great. Now, like I mentioned during the installation, it's important to ensure that the LCD contacts are completely clean and are not bridged or damaged in any way. I actually had an issue where I had to bypass 2 pins on the LCD connector by soldering in some bodge wires from the castellated edges directly to the resistor array near the CPU in order to get the mod to work. I honestly don't know what caused the bridge, but just be aware that you should make sure the LCD pins look good before proceeding to installing the GGHD PCB. Anyway, now that we have the kit up and running, let's go over all of its features. So when you first turn the console on, the video output is set to 720p by default. Let's go ahead and access the on-screen display, or OSD, by pressing and holding the Start and C button for a couple seconds. The OSD menu will show 4 categories: Display Settings, Picture Configuration, Miscellaneous Options, and Info. The main options we're interested in are the Display Settings and Picture Configuration. Let's start by selecting Display Settings. Here we can choose from 3 resolutions: 480p, which scales the Game Gear's 160 by 144 resolution linearly 4 times, 720p, which is scaled linearly 5 times, and 1080i, which is linearly scaled 7 times. I prefer 720p, but I'm glad that we have all these options. The next option we can adjust is scaling. Within each resolution, we have 3 scaling options: Proper, which displays the Game Gear's native aspect ratio, Stretch, which is the image stretched to fit the display's aspect ratio, and TV. This option shows a cropped in full screen image. There's also an option for overscan, which I tend to not use, but again is nice that it's included. Then the last item in the display settings is aspect ratio. Here you can further customize the image with either the DAR option, which stands for display aspect ratio. This setting matches the Game Gear's factory aspect ratio by slightly stretching the image to 4:3. The other option is PAR, or Pixel Aspect Ratio, which ignores the Game Gear's display aspect ratio for a perfectly linearly scaled display, which makes the image appear more squished. Anyway, the next main category is picture configuration. Here we have 5 submenus, with the first being filter. By default, there is no filter, but you can choose between enhanced, smooth, and sharp. For me, I prefer no filter at all because I love seeing those beautiful blocky pixels. You can see all the filter effects here on screen. Next is filter brightness, which does exactly what it sounds like it should do. It makes the filters brighter or dimmer. Next is gamma correction, which seems to adjust the color saturation. Here you can see the 2 options side by side. The left is off, and the right is on. After gamma correction, we have grid lines, which gives the image that pixel grid effect. There are 3 different options you can choose from, again, all shown on screen. We also, of course, have scan lines, of which there are 3 options that adjust the thickness of the scan lines. I'm really glad that GameBox added all these display effects to the GGHD, but for me, I'm a simple man and I like having the effects turned off. And the last OSD menu item that is of interest is under the miscellaneous options, and that is the ability to change the border color. There are 64 colors to choose from, but again, I'm pretty boring and just prefer the black color. Now, another really awesome feature is Sega Master System support. Here you can see I'm loading games directly from my EverDrive, but the colors are a bit messed up. I spoke to Postman from GameBox about the issue and was told that I had an older version of the firmware, which has since been updated to fix the issue. Here's captured footage that Postman sent me showcasing the Master System running, and the colors look great. Alright, so those are the primary features of the GGHD. But now, let's get into the pros and cons. Starting with the pros, I have to say that I absolutely love this kit. Like I said, the Game Gear is a console that is near and dear to me. The GGHD looks great, and I love being able to play my Game Gear library on the big screen. The shell is actually really sleek looking and surprisingly easy to assemble. Additionally, the kit has a great menu of options. I also love that it can play Master System games, even though my particular unit didn't work. Even though the Game Gear is essentially a portable Master System, it's almost like having 2 consoles in one, which is pretty awesome. Okay, so those are the pros, but now let's get into the cons. And the biggest one is, of course, the difficulty of the mod. There are a lot of steps, and it does require you to be very comfortable with soldering. This is definitely not something that should be done by an inexperienced modder. Thankfully, GameBox does offer fully built GGHD consoles, but that gets into my second and last con, which is price. These kits are not cheap, but you have to realize that these mods require upfront non-recurring costs, and these are not mass-produced items. So with that, the cheapest option is a DIY kit, which costs $160 if you print your own shell. If you want the standard black and gray shell, that'll cost an extra $10 for a total of $170. And if you want a custom color shell, that will set you back an extra $40 for a total of $200. Now, like I said, GameBox also offers fully built pre-assembled GGHD consoles, which is a turnkey solution if you don't want to assemble this kit yourself. But it will cost you. A fully built GGHD system will cost $330 with a regular black and gray shell, and $360 for a custom colored shell. Yeah, that is expensive. But I have to say that the amount of labor to assemble one of these is very time consuming. Not to mention this includes the cost of the Game Gear system, as well as the work to refurbish the unit with new capacitors. So honestly, $330 I think is a fair price. Again, we have to keep in mind that these aren't mass-produced products, which hopefully puts that price into perspective. Anyway, if you think the GGHD Consolizing kit is cool, definitely check out these other videos in my Consolizer playlist. I cover a bunch of them from different companies, so I think you'll really enjoy them. Definitely give it a look. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next Thursday.